bitter wind howled across the endless white fields as German soldiers struggled forward through deep snow. Their tanks moved slowly, their trucks froze in place, and their weapons jammed in the brutal cold. Just months earlier, this same army had seemed unstoppable. Europe had fallen before them with shocking speed. Many believed nothing could stop the German war machine. But now, in the winter of 1941, something unexpected was happening. The snow was not just slowing them down. It was beginning to break them. This was the moment when one of the most powerful armies in history met an enemy it had not truly prepared for. Not just the Soviet army, but the brutal Russian winter itself. And what happened in those frozen months would change the course of World War II forever. Welcome to History Plus. If you enjoy powerful true stories from World War II and want to understand the moments that shaped our world, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow, and it lets us bring you more stories like this. In the summer of 1941, Adolf Hitler launched the largest military invasion the world had ever seen. The operation was called Operation Barbarossa. More than 3 million German soldiers, supported by tanks, aircraft, and artillery, stormed across the border into the Soviet Union. The plan was bold and simple. Germany would destroy the Soviet Union quickly before winter arrived. Hitler believed the Soviet state was weak and would collapse within a few months. At first, everything seemed to go exactly as planned. German armored divisions moved with incredible speed. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded and destroyed. Cities fell one after another. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured. To many observers around the world, it looked like the Soviet Union might not survive the year. German soldiers pushed hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. The vast open fields allowed their tanks to move quickly. Their tactics were deadly and efficient. Fast armored spearheads would break through enemy lines while infantry surrounded the trapped forces behind them. This strategy had worked perfectly in Poland, France, and many other battles earlier in the war. But the Soviet Union was not like the countries Germany had fought before. The land was enormous, the distances were vast, and the Soviet people were not ready to surrender their country. As German forces advanced deeper into Soviet territory, the war began to change. Soviet soldiers fought harder with every passing week. Even when they were surrounded, many refused to surrender and kept fighting. Meanwhile, the Soviet government began moving factories far to the east beyond the reach of German bombers. Entire industrial plants were dismantled, loaded onto trains, and rebuilt thousands of miles away. Within months, these factories were producing tanks, guns, and ammunition again. But time was running out for Germany. By October 1941, German forces were approaching Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. If Moscow fell, many believed the Soviet government might collapse. German commanders believed they were close to victory. However, something else was approaching as well. Winter, the German army had expected the war to end before the cold arrived. Their soldiers were not equipped for the brutal Russian winter. Many still wore thin uniforms designed for autumn weather. As temperatures began to fall, the situation quickly became dangerous. At first, the ground turned to thick mud during the autumn rains. Roads became almost impossible to use. Trucks sank into the mud. Tanks struggled to move. Supply lines slowed to a crawl. German soldiers gave this period a name. They called it the Rasputitsa, the season of mud. Food, ammunition, and fuel began arriving later and later. Some units received almost nothing for days. Then the temperature dropped even further. The mud froze solid, and the first heavy snow began to fall. What followed shocked the German army. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Some nights dropped to -30 degrees Celsius. Engines froze during the night. Vehicles refused to start in the morning. Oil thickened like glue inside engines and weapons. Guns stopped firing properly. Machine guns jammed. Artillery pieces became difficult to operate. Even worse, many soldiers began suffering from frostbite. Men who had survived months of fighting suddenly found themselves losing fingers, toes, and sometimes entire limbs to the cold. German soldiers tried everything to stay warm. Some wrapped blankets around their boots. Others burned pieces of wood or furniture just to keep their hands from freezing. But the cold only grew worse. Meanwhile, the Soviet army had something the Germans did not. Many Soviet units were trained and equipped to fight in winter conditions. Their uniforms were warmer, their boots were stronger, and their equipment worked better in the freezing temperatures. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Far to the east, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had been gathering fresh troops. These were divisions from Siberia, soldiers trained to survive and fight in extreme winter climates. These troops were well equipped with winter gear and supported by powerful new tanks like the famous T-34. In early December 1941, as German forces struggled just outside Moscow, the Soviet Union launched a massive counterattack. German soldiers who had been advancing for months suddenly found themselves under heavy attack. Fresh Soviet troops moved through the snow with speed and confidence. Their skis allowed them to move quickly across frozen fields. Their tanks performed better in the cold conditions. The exhausted German army was completely unprepared for such a powerful counterattack. Units that had pushed forward for months were suddenly forced to retreat. For the first time since the invasion, the German war machine was moving backward. Snow covered the battlefield as Soviet forces attacked again and again. German soldiers fought desperately to hold their positions, but many units were already exhausted, undersupplied, and freezing. The dream of a quick German victory in the Soviet Union was beginning to collapse, and this was only the beginning of the winter that would stop one of the most powerful armies in history. The snow kept falling, and with every passing day, the German situation grew worse. What had once been a powerful and unstoppable advance had now turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Soldiers who had marched confidently toward Moscow only weeks earlier were now digging shallow trenches in frozen ground, trying to hold their lines against a determined Soviet counterattack. The cold continued to destroy equipment. Tanks that had been the pride of the German army became almost useless when their engines froze overnight. Soldiers were forced to light fires under vehicles just to start them in the morning. Weapons jammed, radios failed, and trucks carrying supplies often never reached the front lines. The entire German war machine, built on speed and coordination, was beginning to break down in the freezing temperatures. Meanwhile, the Soviet forces kept growing stronger. Fresh divisions from Siberia continued arriving near Moscow. These soldiers were used to extreme winter conditions. They wore thick white camouflage uniforms that blended perfectly with the snowy landscape. Many moved quickly on skis, allowing them to surprise German positions from unexpected directions. When the Soviet counteroffensive expanded in December 1941, the battlefield changed dramatically. Soviet artillery opened fire across a wide front. Infantry units pushed forward through forests and frozen villages, attacking German lines again and again. Tanks like the T-34 proved extremely effective in the harsh conditions, often outperforming German armored vehicles in deep snow and frozen terrain. German commanders quickly realized that holding every position was impossible. Some units were already close to collapse. Entire divisions had lost thousands of soldiers to cold, exhaustion, and constant combat. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles behind the front, making it almost impossible to deliver enough food, ammunition, and winter clothing. For many German soldiers, the war had become a daily fight against both the enemy and the brutal environment. Nights were especially dangerous. Temperatures dropped so low that men sometimes woke up unable to move their fingers or toes. Frostbite spread quickly, and field hospitals were overwhelmed with injured soldiers. Despite the terrible conditions, Hitler refused to allow large-scale retreats. He ordered many units to hold their ground at all costs. Some commanders believed this order saved parts of the front from complete collapse, but it also trapped thousands of soldiers in extremely dangerous positions. As Soviet forces pushed westward, German troops were forced to abandon villages, roads, and defensive lines they had fought hard to capture. The dream of capturing Moscow before winter had completely disappeared. Instead, the German army now struggled simply to survive the freezing battlefield. And as the winter deepened, One thing was becoming clear to both sides. The war in the East would not end quickly. The fighting around Moscow had turned into a brutal test of endurance, and the Soviet Union had just proven that it would not be defeated easily. The Soviet counteroffensive continued to gain momentum as the freezing winter tightened its grip on the battlefield. German soldiers who had once believed victory was close now faced a completely different reality. Soviet troops attacked again, and again across the snowy landscape, pushing the exhausted German forces farther away from Moscow. Fresh Soviet divisions kept arriving, bringing new energy to the front. Many of these soldiers were trained for winter warfare and moved quickly across the snow using skis and sleds. Their white camouflage made them difficult to spot, and they often launched sudden attacks from forests and frozen hills. German positions that once seemed secure were now constantly under threat. German units were struggling with serious shortages. Fuel was limited, ammunition had to be rationed, and winter clothing was still missing for many soldiers. Trucks and tanks often failed to start in the extreme cold, leaving entire units without mobility. Communication lines were unreliable, making it difficult for commanders to coordinate defenses. Despite these problems, many German soldiers fought stubbornly to hold their ground. They built defensive positions in frozen villages and along narrow roads, hoping to slow the Soviet advance. But the Red Army had the advantage of numbers, fresh troops, and growing confidence. For the first time since the invasion of the Soviet Union began, the German army was being pushed backward on a large scale. The myth of unstoppable German momentum was beginning to break. Around Moscow, the battlefield had turned into a brutal struggle where survival depended on endurance, courage, and the ability to fight through one of the harshest winters in modern warfare. The winter battles around Moscow slowly began to reveal a truth that many German commanders had not expected. The Red Army was not collapsing. Instead, it was growing stronger, more organized, and more determined with every passing week. Soviet troops continued pushing the German lines back, village by village, road by road, forcing the once advancing army to fight only for survival. For German soldiers, the dream of a quick victory in the East was now clearly fading. The freezing temperatures, exhausted troops, and constant Soviet pressure had changed the direction of the war. What had started as a fast and confident invasion had turned into a brutal defensive struggle. Many soldiers realized they were now facing an enemy that would never surrender easily. The winter of 1941 proved to be more than just a season. It became a turning point. The German advance toward Moscow had been stopped, and the Red Army had shown the world that Nazi momentum could be broken. From this moment forward, the war on the Eastern Front would become longer, harder, and far more costly than anyone in Berlin had expected. Stories like this remind us how a single moment in history can change the course of an entire war. If you found this story interesting, let us know in the comments what moment from World War II you think changed history the most. And if you enjoy deep historical storytelling like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to History Plus, so you don't miss the next story. Also share this video with friends who love history, because every share helps us bring more powerful stories from the past to life.